Hey everyone, this is a recording about my research for the Yoga Nidra course at Yoga Vidya Gurukul. My name is Erica Sharpe. I studied yoga at Yoga Vidya Gurukul in 2009 in India, and I did their teacher training course there. Since then, I've gotten a PhD in chemistry and a postdoc in human research. And I focused my research recently on Yoga Nidra to see how it can affect people's sleep. And because anxiety often goes hand in hand with insomnia, we've also been looking at anxiety. So I'm going to be talking about some of our preliminary work and where we hope to take it. So, first, some background on insomnia and anxiety. We'll talk about the methods for the studies that we've carried out, give you our results and conclusions and future directions. So, our research takes place in the US, and therefore, we're seeking funding from the US government. So, we frame it in terms of how necessary this research is for the US population. So, keep that in mind for this presentation because I know people are watching from all over the world. But in the US, between 30 and 50% of adults have suffered from insomnia and or anxiety at some point in their life. That's quite a lot. The pandemic impacted the whole world. By summer of 2022, daily negative impacts of insomnia and anxiety were reported by 28% and 52% of US adults, respectively. So, people were experiencing insomnia and anxiety on a daily basis in large proportions. General anxiety disorder is the most common comorbid psychiatric condition to be diagnosed with insomnia, with 73% of people that have anxiety later developing insomnia. So there's some debate about what comes first, chicken or the egg. If people have anxiety and then develop insomnia, or people have insomnia and that can cause anxiety, it can go both ways. This data shows it's very common, though, for people to have anxiety and then develop insomnia. Both of these conditions contribute to increased mortality because of depression, heart disease, and stroke. So while these are conditions that may seem manageable on a daily basis, they add up over time and they can impact you greatly. Currently, pharmaceuticals are used to treat these conditions. Benzodiazepines in particular are used by most people who have insomnia. They carry serious side effects, including risk of death from overdose, especially if they're used along with a pain medicine or an anti-anxiety medicine. So if you have anxiety and insomnia, you're at risk if you're taking medication for both. They impair cognitive function and they delay reaction time. So there's some statistic like over 50% of accidents in the US can be associated with hypnagogic medications. It's a major cause for people to have accidents. Also, they're addictive. So these medications are known to not be the best option, and so therefore they're not considered the standard of care. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a non-pharmaceutical intervention, is considered the standard of care for that reason. However, only 1% of people that have chronic insomnia use CBT. It's more likely that they're still going to go ahead and use benzodiazepines, which is where we see our risk and our problem. Cognitive behavioral therapy, the drawbacks are it's expensive, it's difficult to access. There are not many people who are properly trained to do cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, so it can be hard to find a professional. And once you begin your treatment, it can take over a month before you start to see improvements. And so, therefore, not many people use it. Specifically, if you have insomnia with anxiety, the remission rate, meaning how likely it is that your insomnia is going to go away, is only 34%. So that's really low. You have like a 1 in 3 chance that this is going to help you, and it's hard to access and it's expensive. So there's really a need for an alternative insomnia and anxiety treatment that can act quickly, that's accessible, affordable, effective, and low risk. So, being that I studied how to teach yoga at the Yoga Vidya Gurukul ashram, and Yoga Nidra was a major part of our training, that was one of those practices that I found myself recommending to students quite often when they had issues sleeping or they had issues with stress or anxiety or many other issues, including addiction. And so I would be talking about Yoga Nidra. I gave the Yoga Nidra book to my research advisor years and years ago, and he remembered me talking about it and said, well, no one has actually studied it to see if it can impact sleep in the US. No formal trials had been done. So it seemed like an obvious beginning research project for me who was beginning to study clinical human research. So we started with this project. Yoga Nidra, you all are in this Yoga Nidra course now, so I don't need to tell you what it is, but some things that are important about it as far as this research goes is it's scripted, so you can read right from the book. And the importance of that is that that makes it reproducible for other scientific trials. So if I ran a trial on Yoga Nidra and I used a script from the book and I published a paper and said that it helps people sleep, someone else could say, oh, that's cool, I want to use that. And so they can pick up the book and read the exact same words that I read to our participants and hopefully see the same effect on their participants. And every person is different, so there's a lot of variability. But it's important to have an intervention that can be reproducible if you're studying it in a research project so that someone else can take it and use it in their population. So that's an advantage for Yoga Nidra as compared to a lot of mind-body practices, which can be very hard to describe as an intervention in a research paper so that other people can use it. It's accessible in the sense that you only have to push play and then you lay there and listen. You don't have to wear special clothes. You don't have to have the ability to move in any certain way. You just have to be able to understand the voice that's speaking to you. It can be practiced independently. You don't have to go in person to a class. This could be done remotely. So in a time like the pandemic, that was really important. People needed a lot of help with sleep and anxiety, and they were able to access Yoga Nidra in one of our studies just using a recording. It can be used any time of day. You could use it right before sleep, or you could use it midday. And here I've outlined the steps of the practice, what they include, and kind of how we see the effects of them. This was in our paper that we published on some of these research projects. So in the US, it hadn't been directly studied for insomnia when we started this project. People have like qualitatively assessed sleep quality in some of their studies, usually on eye rest, which is an adaptation of Yoga Nidra that's used in the US, but it hasn't formally been used to assess insomnia. So as you know, Yoga Nidra can be described as yogic sleep or psychic sleep. It's a form of pratyahara or sense withdrawal. So we're bringing our awareness away from the physical body and we're guiding our awareness using the sense of hearing. It can be described as sleep after throwing off physical, mental, and emotional burdens or tensions all at once. So a very restful experience, which could be in line with something that could help with insomnia and anxiety. So this is basically a description of Yoga Nidra that came from the Yoga Nidra book. This is a general presentation, so I use it when I'm talking to people who have never heard of the practice. But the things that I've pulled out from the book that I find important about the practice when I'm trying to communicate it to others are Swami Satyananda Saraswati said, the problem with the modern man is they don't know who they are or where they're going. So this practice really, among the many things that it can help a person do, it can help them to more deeply know themselves and understand themselves, understand their path, and make choices that are best for them. So that can mean breaking bad habits. That can mean many things in their life, but it also decreases all these tensions that we have, the physical, mental, and emotional tensions, to help them sleep better, be less anxious, and help their mind to work more smoothly, improving memory and learning, as you've learned in this course. So during the practice, your consciousness shifts between waking and sleeping many times. I've heard it described as someone may sleep for half the practice, be awake for half the practice. I've heard it described as someone, their consciousness will be on the line between waking and sleeping in this alpha brainwave state. You'll see what we found in our studies. It's somewhere in between both those descriptions. And in the book, it describes that when you practice Yoga Nidra regularly, you can learn to become aware of your internal and external environment while you're sleeping and while you're awake. So the author points out that while you're dreaming, you can learn about your memories and your emotions. And then while you're in a deep sleep, you can learn about your instincts and your drive. It's very important for feeling like you know who you are and where you're going. So previous research that has happened before our studies, the others that existed have looked at brainwave changes and patterns during the practice using fMRI. usually using people who are very familiar with the practice. So not anyone who is brand new to Yoga Nidra. So it's not all that translatable to the general population. Some other studies have looked at neurotransmitters and hormones, such as dopamine. They've looked at and hormones, including those involved with female reproductive system and how Yoga Nidra has impacted that. They've looked at the effects of Yoga Nidra on depression, stress, pain, and perceived sleep quality, but that's a little different than directly using it as an intervention for insomnia. And then also early morning waking during menopause. So some very specific studies have been done. And then recently, between 2021 and 2023, when I prepared this version of the presentation, there's probably been more by now. Yoga Nidra has been used during the pandemic versus music to assess how it could affect insomnia in healthcare workers. All of these studies were done in India. So I will say that oftentimes studies done in India are still attempted to be repeated in the US to get the buy-in from clinicians in the US, because there's a little bit more demand for rigorous study design in the US. It's hard to get funded on a large trial unless you prove certain things about your study design. So studies that were done in India are very important. However, they are still sometimes lacking in certain aspects of their study design. So it's still useful for research to be done on a larger scale in the US as well. So they've studied Yoga Nidra versus music for insomnia in healthcare workers in Lucknow. Yoga Nidra versus CBT for insomnia. This was a study done in Delhi. Yoga Nidra for insomnia, cognitive processing, and memory in Pune. And then Yoga Nidra versus Ayurveda for sleep quality and quality of life in Uttarakhand. So these studies have been going on recently. Our work, we've done 4 pilot trials, and I think trying to keep an eye on the time, although it's a recording, so I guess you can skip around if you need to. So we have done 4 preliminary trials. The first one we did was a qualitative study where we did focus groups following a community yoga practice. So we just offered anyone who was interested in looking at Yoga Nidra, trying Yoga Nidra. I'm not sure if we advertised it as an intervention for sleep or not. Anyone could come try it and then answer some questions for us in our discussion. And then after that, we used that data to inform the design of a sleep lab trial. We call it a sleep lab trial because we were using EEG, which is the polysomnography, or the gold standard for measuring sleep. So we were looking at how Yoga Nidra affects the brain and whether people fall asleep during the practice during this study. And then we did a remote trial during the pandemic. And currently we're conducting a trial on actually tapering benzodiazepine medications using Yoga Nidra. And that's particularly done in older adults in this trial. We published these trials. You can find them on PubMed or elsewhere. So I believe I'm showing one of the studies at a time. So I'll show you the methods and the results for each one. So for our focus group study, this is Satyananda Saraswati, who created Yoga Nidra, who wrote the book. Our focus group study, we used a recording, which the link may not work anymore, I've been told, but I do have an MP3 if anyone's interested. We used a recording by Swami Satyananda Saraswati himself, and decided to do this because it represented the most authentic version of the practice. And I was curious how people would receive it. So we held 6 focus groups in Oregon, New York, and Hawaii. That just happened to be where our investigators were. And they were done in the community. Groups often included community members as well as students. And one of them was actually done in a jail in upstate New York because I had access to that population because they were working with another teacher that I knew. So that was interesting to have that group. So after they listened to the recording, we all sat around in a focus group sort of setting, and I asked 5 or 6 questions about their experience. They also did some surveys before. So 80% of participants who attended these focus groups reported having insomnia. So this stands out because we didn't recruit people with insomnia and we didn't exclude anyone. We just said, come and try this practice. So many people had trouble sleeping on the Insomnia Severity Index. And we asked them about factors that may impair their sleep and also what they're doing to improve it. So we found a lot of the things that impair their sleep are related to anxiety and stress: active mind, rumination, anxiety, worry, and stress. And then we asked them about what they're doing to help themselves sleep. Do they have any sleep hygiene practices? A lot of people knew about keeping lights out, making good choices during the day, like not having caffeine right before bed, keeping a quiet atmosphere, things like that. Less people did meditation or yoga. Only one person had ever done yoga nidra in this group. And we had them do the positive negative affect survey before and after the practice. This basically kind of, you can see it as measuring, I guess, kind of excitability. Like positive can include characteristics that go along with feeling positive or exuberant. Negative can be characteristics that go along with feeling negative, like, angry, upset, things like that. And there, you can look it up. There's a whole list of the types of questions that are asked. But basically, positive affect decreased and negative affect decreased. And this is a finding. Negative affect decreased with statistical significance, so they were definitely feeling less negative. And both of these findings are what we would expect. Meditative practices, such as another study that was done using Tibetan singing bowls, have been found to just kind of bring you more to a neutral state or a Zen-like state. You're not as excitable, you're not as upset, you're not as anything, you're just, cool down, calm down. And then we analyzed our focus group discussions and broke them into 3 themes. The first one was the response to the practice. The second was factors affecting their engagement. Some people commented on like what was preventing them to fully feel like they were practicing. And third is potential as a clinical intervention. And this is what we were interested in for future trial designs. Response to yoga nidra. A lot of people mentioned falling asleep. A lot of people mentioned feeling very relaxed. And a few people mentioned this feeling of sense withdrawal. One person very specifically described feeling like they lost awareness of their boundary between their body and the rest of the world, or their boundary and the floor, which was interesting. Factors affecting engagement. So we had people have a lot to say about why they felt like they couldn't get into the practice. Some people just had a busy brain. They couldn't quite settle down. Also, most people were practicing yoga nidra for the first time ever, so it was all new to them. Probably doing it a second or third time, they may feel more able to settle in because they know what's coming. And then there were a lot of comments about the delivery of the practice, is a general way to say it. Since it was an older recording, there was some crackling sort of sounds on the audio. It was not like a new digital type of thing. And then the voice and the accent, we had a lot of comments on. So this was Satyananda Saraswati himself speaking. However, the accent confused some people. They were caught up on words that they couldn't quite understand, so they had trouble following body parts that they didn't understand or visuals that they couldn't bring to mind because they couldn't understand it. And then we had some people comment on the tone, that it was a little bit commanding, and they wanted something softer. So in the US, some people have been sort of conditioned to this really, really soft, kind of dreamy like voice for meditation. Like fast forward almost 10 years when I'm working on this drug tapering trial, I'll just share like a short story. Most people, I use a recording of my own voice for this trial, and most people that have used it, and I've been using my voice on recordings since 2017 for research trials, and then also for a university level class that I teach. Most people find the practice very relaxing, but there was one woman in particular in this current trial who did not like my voice and did not find it relaxing, and she was looking for something different. So people can have very specific responses to the voice that's delivering yoga nidra. So this is kind of an aside, but it would be interesting to look at that. And the study design will be a little complicated because, of course, there's male and female, there's different accents, and there's just different levels of harshness in a voice, and people will respond to things differently. So that was a piece of feedback that I wasn't expecting. I thought that the recording by the creator of the practice was pretty authentic and had its own like power to it because he was the creator of the practice. But we had some strong feedback that it was a little difficult to follow and they would be interested in a different voice. So for our future study, I recorded it and we used that. Also because we created our own version of a script so that people could fall asleep at the end. So we needed to create a new recording. And then the third theme was potential as a clinical intervention. So we asked people, if you had trouble sleeping, do you think that you would use this practice? Many people said that they would, or they would share it with a friend who had trouble sleeping. Anxiety, we didn't ask about that specifically, but people did bring up that they really felt like their anxiety had decreased. And then pain, again, another huge issue in the US, especially with the opiates that are being used and the overuse that's going on with that. We didn't ask about pain, but people volunteered, more than one person volunteered that pain that they were having subsided during the practice. Specifically, this quote was from someone in the jail. She had some kind of operation on her back and she hadn't slept well since she had been there. And she felt like during this, she was able to really relax for the first time. So that was a focus group study. We learned some things about how to make the practice more comfortable for our participants. And then we went on to do this sleep lab trial. So mechanistic or sleep lab trial is what this study was. So we had a small population. It was 18 people. We split them into two groups. And we were looking at how Yoga Nidra impacts the brain and the body during and after the practice. So half of the group, everybody at the first visit just laid quietly on this massage table for 90 minutes. And then at the second visit, half of the group did Yoga Nidra for the first 30 minutes of that 90-minute intervention, and half of the group laid quietly again. So this was to explore kind of the first night effect, where at the first visit, people may not be very relaxed and we may not truly be capturing their rest during a 90-minute relaxation window. So we had them do it once and then do it a second time and see if it was similar, if it changed at all. And then the other group did Yoga Nidra so that we could compare them, those same people doing Yoga Nidra at visit 1 and visit 2, and compare the two groups to one another, both at visit 2. So on everyone, we measured their breathing rate during the 90 minutes, their heart rate variability, their changes in brain waves, and also, therefore, with this EEG setup, we looked at their sleep, whether they were falling asleep, staying awake, and when they were doing that. And then we did pre-post assessments on anxiety and mood. So these two devices are both wearable. So they just clipped the respiration rate monitor on their waistband, and we attached this HRV monitor to their chest, like sticks on. And then the EEG setup, that was an interesting thing that I got to learn, was how to put EEG patches all over people's heads. This was a sleep montage. So we measured frontal, central, and occipital lobe, and we had reference electrodes on their ears. We had electrodes on their eyes, near their eyes, because the moment you fall asleep, your eyes roll, so it captures that. And then muscle sensors above and below the jawline, because when you enter REM sleep, you're paralyzed from the jawline down, so it detects a difference in muscle tension between these 2 points. So it was really interesting to learn about sleep detection, and we got some interesting data about that too. So we recruited 19 people within 3 months. We only lost one. No adverse events, nothing like dangerous happened in the study. We found for our results that 78% of the Yoga Nidra participants did fall asleep during the practice. On average, it took 9 minutes, and they continued to sleep for about half of the practice. So this is in line with the description of Yoga Nidra in the Yoga Nidra book, where people are asleep for about half of the practice. It was interesting to be able to say that using EEG, gold standard polysomnography, people are actually sleeping. They're not just in a state of meditation where they felt like they were sleeping. They are falling asleep. And in the focus groups, I wish that we had done a little focus group after the mechanistic study as well, because we could really put this information together. But in the focus groups, people were able to recount a lot of what they heard of the practice, even though in this next study, we measured that the people practicing Yoga Nidra did fall asleep. So that also lines up with the description of the book, where you can be sleeping and still know what's going on around you and remember that. So that's a really interesting finding, and it kind of helps to describe the state of consciousness that is Yoga Nidra. And I would like to reproduce that in a more formally designed study. We didn't find significant changes we were trying to measure alpha EEG power in the occipital lobe, which is something that had been reported on in the Yoga Nidra book. But we have a small population, so that's not to say that it won't ever change, but in our study it didn't. HRV didn't show a significant change either. But respiration rate did significantly decrease in the Yoga Nidra group as compared to laying quietly. So I think I have a graph here. So after we did the experience of opposites and we did this instructions on the Nadi Shodhana practice, and then people went on to do their independent practice, that's when the breath rate decreased in the Yoga Nidra group as compared to the lying quietly group. So it could be that doing that mental pranayama practice slowed their breathing down enough that it stayed lower throughout the rest of the time. It stayed significantly lower for the rest of the practice, and then for about 63% of the hour that followed while they were continuing to rest. So this shows a parasympathetic response. These people are more relaxed than the people in the other group that were just left to lie quietly and try to rest. And I'll go back to the previous slide, which showed comfort and tolerability. Over 50% of everyone asked said that the intervention was comfortable, the intervention was tolerable. These are just research questions we like to ask when we're trying a new intervention. Was there any issue with what we asked you to do? And for challenges and distractions, there were not many comments. Distractions usually included light from the windows or people walking in the hallway, which was hard to prevent. And I think one person complained about the EEG ear clips. So our EEG measurements, this star shows our primary outcome, which was alpha power in the occipital lobe. And we did show in the Yoga Nidra group, you can see the average value goes up while the average value of the control group goes down, but the error bars are huge. So nothing was significant in this. And again, I think that's because our population was small. So this is a graph of the sleep that was detected. We overlaid the steps of the practice with kind of a sleep architecture map given to us by the polysomnography technician who analyzed our sleep data. And I was really curious to see if any particular steps of the practice were going to show us, like, this is definitely when everybody falls asleep, or this is definitely when everybody wakes up. There weren't clear trends, but again, we only had 9 people who did Yoga Nidra, so it's not going to be a large enough sample necessarily to show us something like that. But you can see from this that it's not a distinct awake for half, asleep for half, and it's not any sort of they're not asleep and they're not awake. People are awake, and then in N1 and N2 and 3 and REM stages, some people entered, not on this graph, but during the whole practice. So they're in and out of sleep. So this person was awake, fell asleep, woke up, fell asleep, woke up, fell asleep, went into deeper sleep, woke up, slept, woke up, and then stayed awake, and then fell asleep a little bit towards the end. So this was at visit 1, where they were just laying quietly. At visit 2, when they did Yoga Nidra, again, they were waking up, falling asleep throughout the practice. And then during the hour later, the hour after the practice, this person was able to fall asleep several more times. So perhaps this person was helped to sleep more after Yoga Nidra. You can see that they slept more at visit 2 than they did at visit 1, where they didn't practice Yoga Nidra. Although we didn't find statistically significant differences between the groups, looking individually, you can see potentially some changes that occurred because of the practice. And then heart rate variability, these lines, they cross each other. And if you add the error bars, there's not a significant change, but in a larger population, there might be. Heart rate variability is a measure that's often used to indicate parasympathetic response. So if heart rate variability goes up, it can indicate that a person is more relaxed. So that was our mechanistic study. Again, the major findings were that people do fall asleep during the practice. They fall asleep and wake up several times during the practice, and that they are more relaxed during the practice than when they were just asked to lay quietly, as indicated by their breathing rate that went down. So then during the pandemic, when everything went remote, I was teaching a Yoga Nidra class online, and I decided to do a research study around it. So I collected surveys before and after the practice through RedCap. It was simple questions like this, as you can see. It was a 30-minute Yoga Nidra practice. I offered it synchronously through the yoga studio here in upstate New York, and also asynchronously just by sharing a link online. And anyone from all over the world could access it. We were just asking them to try the practice once and fill out surveys before and after about anxiety and sleep. So interestingly, this synchronous versus asynchronous, I only had 3 people showing up regularly to my synchronous class. They were people who knew me and would attend my class in person. And they attended every week. It was a very nice kind of community thing for them at an important time, but it was a small group. But the asynchronous version of the study, where we shared the link to my class that anyone could access later, that got 73 people during the same time period. So it was much easier for people to access it whenever they wanted to, as compared to trying to join the class at the time that I was teaching it, which is an important study when you're designing remote yoga trials, because people might be inclined to foster community and try to join together. There's definitely a benefit to that, but when you're trying to recruit and you're trying to get more people, the asynchronous option can be very helpful. So we got 73 people to try the practice. Participants adhered well. These are all things that we usually measure when we're piloting something. Meaning that they did the intervention and they did their surveys. So 70% of the people did their survey before and after the intervention. Participants did show interest in continuing the practice. So 40% of the people came back and tried the practice again. Generally, they were doing it like once per week if they were doing it more than once. And the intervention was safe. There was no adverse events reported. So our key finding from this remote study was the change in anxiety. So this bold line at 35 represents kind of a normal level of anxiety on the state trait anxiety survey. This was during the pandemic. This was, I think, March through June or something. Maybe not March. I think it was maybe April through June or something that I ran it during 2020. So this was when all the news and everything was really starting up and people were very anxious. So on average, their anxiety was much higher than normal when they came to the class. And this was right before the practice. And then after the practice, they filled out the survey again. And the average anxiety had dropped below what the normal level of anxiety is. So that's a huge change just following one Yoga Nidra practice. So Yoga Nidra can have an acute impact on momentary anxiety. That's what we found in this study. So 74% of the people in the study reported anxiety. And this decrease that you see here represents a 41% decrease in anxiety, with 50% of the people dropping from above this line to below this bold line from before to after the practice. And then for sleep, we had people fill out a sleep survey, Insomnia Severity Index, when they arrived at the online class or when they logged into Access, and then the next morning telling us how their sleep was. So they filled out the Insomnia Severity Index when they got there, and then they also answered some questions about their sleep using a post-sleep questionnaire that is generally used as part of a sleep diary in other research studies. So they told us how their sleep was the night after doing Yoga Nidra as compared to the night before. Let's see. So momentary anxiety, I think, is not shown here. that's talking about the graph on the other page. But sleep onset latency is shown here. So basically, it decreased significantly, especially the people who reported that it took them between 30 minutes and 2 hours to fall asleep the night before. These people experienced a decrease in sleep onset latency of 30 minutes after doing the practice just once. And this is self-report, but it was their perception that it took them a lot less time to fall asleep after doing the practice. So these people said it took me between half an hour and 2 hours to fall asleep last night, but after doing Yoga Nidra this next night, it took me 30 minutes less to fall asleep. So that's the group that was impacted the most. People who had kind of a normal sleep onset latency between 0 to 30 minutes, the 15 to 30 minute people still said that there was an improvement, a small improvement of 10 minutes, but those people who already had a pretty normal sleep onset latency didn't really change. And the people who were saying it took them more than 2 hours to fall asleep, they probably needed more than one Yoga Nidra practice. They reported the next night that their sleep was even worse on average. So they were really having trouble sleeping. In summary, 52% of the respondents reported a decrease in sleep onset latency the following day. The group overall average was, it took about 25 minutes less to fall asleep. And the average change, that's the group of people who said that they did decrease in their sleep onset latency. So the average for those people was 25 minutes. And then overall, there was an average change of 10 minutes because some people did increase and some people decreased more. And the strongest change, like I said up here, was 34 minutes for those people who reported 30 to 120 minutes at baseline for falling asleep. So yeah, overall, on average, sleep onset latency, this is self-report, decreased after one practice, particularly for the group that was suffering in the range of 30 minutes to 2 hours to fall asleep. So these preliminary trials show that Yoga Nidra can be useful for insomnia and anxiety. It's fast acting, as you saw in the remote study where people did one practice. You could see it decreased anxiety right away. It improved sleep after one night. It's accessible to a broad population. You can just send a link or an audio file and they can use it. It's free, it's affordable, effective in our preliminary studies, and low risk. So again, it's a valuable candidate for further study. And we've been applying for grants to try to run more longitudinal trials, meaning people doing Yoga Nidra for weeks on end in larger samples, and then also comparing like doing the practice during the day versus right before bed, or even in the middle of the night if someone were to wake up during the night. That's a use case that a lot of people have asked about and which we've encouraged as long as they can fall asleep during it. And for all of these remote trials, we are interested in using these portable devices like the HRV and respiratory rate monitor that you saw on the previous slides, as well as the Aura ring, which you may have heard of. It's a ring that tracks your sleep and is actually pretty accurate in line with EEG. So that's a nice portable way to monitor sleep. And then along with our future ongoing work is this drug tapering trial, which I'll tell you a little bit about. So it's ongoing right now. We're working with a population of older adults. It's funded by the National Institute of Aging, so it's focused on older adults. And specifically, National Institute on Aging has funded a network called the USD Prescribing Network. And their mission is to help people use less pharmaceuticals and to get off of addictive drugs. So I applied for a grant through them, a pilot trial grant where they were offering money for people to run pilot trials on how to get people off of benzodiazepines. This is nothing necessarily asking for yoga research, but I saw it and I'm a yoga researcher looking at sleep. So I applied for it and they gave us funding. So that was a good moment for actually our research team because we're entering the space of pharmaceutical research and beginning to actually work with people to use less of their drugs and use yoga instead. So it's kind of an exciting prospect. So in this trial, we're recruiting older adults. Half of them are trying Yoga Nidra. half of them are trying sleep hygiene and anxiety education. And so this is kind of like standard of care. People, they learn about their condition, but we're not necessarily doing anything to change what's going on with them. And then after 2 weeks, they swap. So the education groups gets Yoga Nidra, and the Yoga Nidra group gets education. After 2 more weeks, they continue to have access to both education and Yoga Nidra. And we'll be checking with them every 2 weeks about their anxiety and about their sleep and about their medication use. When we first applied for the pilot award, the plan was to take people who had been using benzodiazepines for several months and have them work with a psychiatrist and do yoga nidra and actually assign them a tapering plan to get them off of their benzodiazepines. However, we had to transfer the project to a different institution, and along with that comes some moving around of funds to pay for another study coordinator. So we had to simplify the design. So instead of actually tapering their drugs, we are monitoring whether they become motivated to use less of their medication, and if they do, monitoring them for any side effects. And we're going to use this preliminary data to apply for a future grant where we can do something more focused on actually tapering medications. And these are just some pictures of the wearable biomonitors that we're interested in using. Remote clinical research is becoming more popular now. It wasn't very popular when we first started, but because of the pandemic, people are more interested in carrying out remote studies. So heart rate variability, the wearable thing that can go on your chest, respiration rate that can clip on your belt, and the Aura ring for sleep. There's also options for monitoring blood pressure in a more portable way. So all my research would not be possible without my mentors. Ryan Bradley is the mentor that I worked with during my postdoc and on all of this research. And Catherine Booth LaForce, Heather Zwicky, Von Lin, and Karen Sherman were mentors during my postdoc where I started this research. Also the other people who trained along with me and collaborators for the different studies as well. And I'd also for sure like to acknowledge Yoga Vidya Gurukul, Kate and Gandhar and Guruji, and all of the teachers and the people that support the ashram. My life was changed by studying there, and my knowledge of Yoga Nidra came from there. And so I'm trying to share that with the US and do some rigorous research on the practice to show that it can have a positive effect on sleep and anxiety, and hoping that medical doctors in the West can adopt this practice in its authentic form and use it properly to help people be healthier. This is a recording for you. I recognize that it's not live for you to ask me questions, but I'll be sending it in the WhatsApp group. I hope you watch this recording, and I'm happy to answer any questions. My Yoga Nidra research is active and ongoing, and all of your ideas and questions help to shape my research. So I look forward to hearing from you.